Before I start, I want to apologize. I have a window unit right next to me, and this is just where my desk is at, so I apologize for that. But I just finished at JobCorps a few weeks ago. I was there for 8 months, and there's quite a few things that I wish I had learned before starting at JobCorps, and I wanted to share them with y'all so that y'all aren't blindsided by these revelations like I was. So, start off, as far as I'm aware, your pay will vary by state and center. Like, if you're at a more rural center in a state where the cost of living isn't that high, you're not going to be paid as much. And so if you're at urban centers in a higher cost of living area, you're probably going to be paid more. But like at my center, we got $40 every 2 weeks for our first 6 months, and then our pay went up to $60. And also with the pay, they'll tell you when you get there that for your first 6 months you'll be paid X amount, and then after 6 months that will increase. That's true-ish. What they don't tell you is that they mean your first 6 months within your trade. Your first 30 days on center are your orientation period. So after those 30 days, then you're officially a trade student. So that 6-month timer of being paid this amount before the pay increases does not start until after your first 30 days. Some states are notorious for having bad centers, like poorly funded, not great staff, things like that. The states I went to is included in that. Most of the states I had learned that were like notorious for having bad centers were like in the southeast US, and even though the state I was at isn't considered in the southeast region according to the JobCorps map, it was still included in that. Rural centers will have way less funding than urban centers. I went to a rural center and there wasn't money for students to have seconds for food, and it's not like you got fed a lot anyway, and it wasn't great food either because they don't have the money for, actual good food. Most students, I'm one of them, survived off of whatever they could afford at Walmart. Oh, and students at rural centers will have significantly less freedoms. The center I went to, it was a rural center. We lived in a state park, and it took an hour just to get to Walmart. So there was no going off center after trade to do anything fun because you got to be back by a certain time, and also you can't leave center unless it's the weekend or you're going on PTO. Fun fact. At least if you're at a center like the one I went to. I know that centers in the city, like I know in Boston, when you're done with trade for the day, you can just walk off and go to a restaurant or whatever. You can't do that at more rural centers. Okay. Privacy in any form is not guaranteed at all. I had an online friend that also attended JobCorps at the same time I was. They showed me what their room looked like. It was 4 beds, and there were 4 single beds with a divider between, it was bed, bed, divider, bed, bed. And then they had their own toilet, sink, and shower. Whereas at my center, we were up to 6 in a room. In some dorms, there was an extra room that had up to 8 people could sleep in it. But we had up to 6 people in a room, bunk beds, no dividers between any beds. It was just one open room. Bit bigger than my bedroom, with 3 sets of bunk beds, and each like dorm section had 5 rooms and 1 communal bathroom. So it was 4 toilets, 4 sinks, 4-ish showers that you had to share with everybody, with up to 29 other people. And so in the shower, that's the most privacy you're gonna get, and even then it is not a lot of privacy. So let's see. Oh, there's going to be problems that staff and or maintenance have to handle, like they're required to handle, that you will have to handle yourself. Like, we had a problem where we had a leaking sink for months, and eventually the pipe completely rusted off, and it was another few weeks before maintenance even knew about it, despite the multiple work orders that had been sent in for them to fix our sink. It was at the point where we started looking up the model number of, like, figuring out what type of pipe we had and buying and installing a new version ourselves. We were this close to doing that before we finally showed maintenance, hey, look at this, there's no pipe here. And they went, oh, this is the first I'm hearing about it. Months later, this was like 4 or 5 months later. Oh, and fun fact, when they finally saw that we didn't have a pipe on our backroom sink, that was about a week into our snowed in, iced in time, and there was no heat in any of the buildings. It got down to the single digits, like almost in the negatives. And that's how cold it was. Not a single building had heat. But yeah, be prepared to have to handle staff problems yourself. Let's see. Oh, in many cases, the bottom line will come first. You're not gonna, the center's not gonna have enough money to do XYZ, but they're going to be bringing in like as many students as possible, as many new students as they possibly can. Sorry, I need to fidget. They're going to be bringing in as many new students as they possibly can, as often as they can, because the more bodies they have in beds, the more money they get, and it's not like that money is going towards the students. I'm going to tell you that now. Do not trust staff to communicate with you or each other. There were many times where we would ask staff, hey, when are we going to Walmart this week? Because the day would change quite often, depending on what staff are scheduled to work when. And some staff will say one day, some staff will say another day, and some staff just won't know at all. And if there's something like a new rule, if staff is informed of this new rule at all, more than likely you won't find out about the new rule until you've gotten in trouble for breaking said rule. Oh, your admissions counselor is going to lie to you. 100% they will lie to you. I was a mentor 4 times while I was at JobCorps, a new student mentor 4 different times, and I couldn't tell you the number of people who would come in and asking about a swimming pool and stuff like that. Our center never had a swimming pool, but their admissions counselor told them, yeah, they've got a swimming pool. JobCorps places have swimming pools. They'll tell you just about anything. I am physically disabled. I walk with the kinks. I have a really bad leg. And when I was signing up, my admissions counselor, or when I was filling out my application, really, my admissions counselor was telling me, I told them what center I had in mind that I wanted to go to. And they're like, oh yeah, that's a great place. And you don't have to worry about, like long distances, walking long distances or anything like that. Everything is super close together, so it won't be bad on your leg. I walked about a mile a day just to do basic stuff, just to get to the cafeteria, get to my trade, get back to the dorms after everything. So I spent a lot of free time, almost all of my free time, I spent in my dorm because my leg is hurting from all the walking I had already done. And I spent a lot of the day sitting in a chair also because I worked at a computer all day. But the mile worth of walking was really what got me. Oh, some trades are going to be deemed like more important than other trades that are offered at your center. Like, like I said, I went to a rural center. There were 3 hard trades and 1 hard advanced trade, and 2 soft trades. I was at one of the 2 soft trades. I was office administration, and the hard trades were, if they needed something new, like new equipment for anything like that, they would get it. It may take a little while, but they'd get it. Whereas in my trade, we did not have enough computers for everybody. And the computers we did have, half of them were so outdated, they wouldn't even turn on. And it's not like they're from the 90s or anything like that, but with so many software updates, they wouldn't support the Windows software that we needed to do any of our work. So they wouldn't even turn on, really. If they did turn on, it'll take a few minutes just to open a browser. And your work-based learning opportunities are going to be significantly less, like they were for me and my trade and the other soft trade. Because we were out in the middle of nowhere, and the other hard trades were more important for the area. So they had significantly more work-based learning opportunities than the soft trades. I had 2 in the 8 months I was there, and they're so strict with the resume and all that, with the resume and the application and all that for those work-based learning opportunities, that it was pretty much send the resume in, straight to the trash. And that's pretty much how it was. You have to jump through constant hoops if you want to do anything. Especially more rural centers. Like, a lot of this, if you can't tell, is more directed at the rural centers because that's the kind of center I was at. But you couldn't leave center unless you were going on PTO or weekend pass or anything like that. You couldn't leave center without it being one of those things, or going on a rec trip like to Walmart or something like that. And in order to do that, you had to fill out PTO request or weekend pass request, and you had to get a signature from, I don't remember how many different staff. You had to have a signature from your trade instructor, your education teacher, regardless of whether or not you were in education, the center standards officer, the counseling director, and the cafeteria director. Maybe more, I don't remember. And if you were going to like stay at a hotel or anything like that, you had to put in the hotel you're going to, the contact information for that hotel, your what's it called? Your reservation number for that hotel room. You had to put all that in because they can and will call up that hotel to verify that that's where you're going. And it could take a little bit for you to get that confirmed or accepted. And also, last, you need to do extensive research on the center you want to go to before you actually settle on one, because in some cases it seems like it is easier to resign and reapply after a year than it is to ask for a transfer or request a transfer, because people who didn't do the extensive research that you should before starting on the different centers, people who didn't do that, like there were 2 people I know specifically off the top of my head because one was in my room and the other I mentored. They didn't do the extensive research on what centers offer what trades, and came to our center thinking that we had that trade that they wanted to do. When they found out we didn't have that trade, they had to put in a transfer request, and it took about 4 months each for their transfers to go through. So one person was in a trade sitting around doing nothing, and the other person was full-time education sitting around doing nothing. Transfers will take months to do to, like, you put in a request, it'll take months before you get accepted to whatever center you're wanting to go to. And you'll find out, like, the night before that your transfer was accepted and that you're leaving, which is what happened, at least with the second person. I don't know about the first person, but the person who was in my room, yeah, they found out the night before they were leaving that they were going to leave the next morning, in which, thanks to lack of communication through staff, or between staff, they didn't end up leaving until about 2 o'clock the next afternoon, even though they were told they were leaving, like, right after breakfast, which breakfast for us was 6:30 to 7:15 in the morning. But there's likely other things. I highly suggest you watch other videos about this, but these are just some of the things that I had wanted to know about, that I wish I had known about before starting at JobCorps. Just the number one thing, do a lot of research. If you're able to talk to current and former JobCorps students, I would absolutely do that, so that you can learn as much as possible, so you can have that informed decision before starting. Good luck if you decide to start JobCorps. There are a lot of positives and negatives for in JobCorps, but I graduated with 29 or 30 certifications in office administration. I say 29 or 30 because I got one certification after completing 3 others. But anyway, you can have a lot of great opportunities after completing JobCorps, but those opportunities can take a little while to get there. So, good luck if you decide to do JobCorps.